This is Metabolic Mastery, a KORR Medical Technologies podcast dedicated to advancing knowledge and practice in metabolic testing. Welcome to Metabolic Mastery, brought to you by KORR Medical Technologies. I'm Dr. Marc Humbert. This is my co-host, Dr. Cameron Garber. And today we've got Richard Diaz with us. He's a performance coach, founder of Diaz Human Performance. And so a real treat today. He's got lots of years of experience. He was just telling us about that. So let's just dive right in. Tell us how you got into this whole game. What interested you in coaching in the first place? What's your story?
You know, I thought about this a lot yesterday. You know, when they sent me this list of questions and how I might approach them, and it definitely is a story because I almost accidentally got into the business of owning gyms. I took over a YMCA that was closing. And the people I worked with, when I discussed it with them, they told me that it was not something I could do. It was going to cost too much money and blah, 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 blah. And, the challenge was set. And I thought, well, let me look into this. And by hook or crook, I found out that there was a way to do it. And I ended up taking a silent partner. And interestingly enough, he was a pretty old fella. And I say that because he was my age now, and he helped me get possession of this YMCA. And so literally what was happening, there was a day where the YMCA was going to close, and they notified all the members, and they told them that if they were due any refund, show up on these days, and they would send them a check. Well, I arranged to be at the other end of the table where they could just endorse the check over to me, right, and keep them as members. So over the course of about 3 days, I built my membership that was already existing, and I was being funded. And so I got into the business, and I was in that business at that YMCA facility. And by the way, I didn't have a name for it yet. You were talking about business names and failure. When people asked me, who do I make the check out to, I didn't know what to say. So, being a bit of a smart ass, I said, hey, Your Fitness. and then they said, how do you spell it? I said, YORE. And later on, we had a contest to figure out what to name the place. And we just named it after the city it was in. But so 10 years later, I decided that the building I was in was dilapidated. I needed to move on. So I built a new facility, and I got an SBA loan. So now I'm a big boy and I can make this kind of thing happen. And in the course of getting my loan, I started thinking about all the toys I wanted. And I had been, over the course of those 10 years, attending the URSA conventions, wherever they might be, every year, looking at all, if you've been there, you're looking at all the new toys, and, it's like this opportunity to get a sense of what your competition is going to do or not do. And sure enough, I came across a booth where there was a fella, exercise physiologist, and he had a pretty girl on an exercise bike, with a pneumatic in her mouth, and and I'm like, what are you doing, And he started explaining to me that he could identify what her fat utilization was relative to carbohydrate utilization, and so on and so forth. And I was just absolutely fascinated by it. And I started looking into it. And you have to appreciate, this is a long time ago. And looking into the cost, and it was a lot of money. Let's put it like that. It was a lot of money. I bought a cart from Med Graphics. This is before they created the New Leaf product. And so the expense for this device was quite a bit of money. And, back then there was no hard drive. So what you printed is what you get, and it's like, even then your printer was like a dot matrix kind of a situation, right? And so I fashioned this device in my facility, and I was so impassioned by the idea of trying to figure this out that I spent every waking moment I could to learn as much as I could about conducting these tests. And with a little bit of time, what ended up happening was I started touring other facilities to do testing for various people in their facilities. Like spinning was a big deal back then. I would go in and I would offer testing to people that were doing spinning classes. Kickboxing, and this is in Southern California. Kickboxing and Billy Blanks and all this was a real big deal. I was going into kickboxing studios and doing testing on kickboxing enthusiasts. And then with time, I got involved with other people that were in the business of doing testing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a guy by the name of Dr. Herman Falsetti. Falsetti used to do all the testing. He's what was his thing? He was a cardiologist. And his thing was he was doing testing for professional cycling teams. Lance Armstrong, when he was with U.S. Postal Team, and the fellow that worked with him, you probably know this guy, a guy named Saul Blah. You're familiar with him? So Saul and I ended up being partners for a bit. And then we started doing testing on the LA Kings, the professional hockey team. So every season, I would go in and do preseason diagnostics on 52 hockey players. And then I would do wind gait testing, VO₂max testing, and boom, boom, boom. So I did about 3 years of that. And so this became such a big part of my life, the testing, and the fascination I had for it, because to me, I looked at it like a crystal ball. You give me an individual I never met before, and I can identify who they are just based on the test. And so, I mean, get a good sense of who they are, I should say. And so it evolved. And with time, I decided to be out of the gym business. And I built a facility that was just for me, where I would do testing. And back then, there was a lot of triathlon work. And there was the new guard sports that are out, like the Spartan racing and HYROX and all those type of events weren't in existence yet. So the bulk of the work I was doing was with triathletes and runners. And so it was just kind of a kismet situation, right? One thing led to another, one thing led to another. And then I would have people walk into my facility that I would end up, my practice was to Google them after they showed up because it was interesting to find out who they were. So I ended up working with professional boxers, world champion, middleweight champion of the world, featherweight champion of the world, came to me from Jakarta, Indonesia. I was getting people that were coming to me from all walks of life, started working with soccer players, football players, and doing high-speed, overspeed development training and gait analysis and bike fitting. So my entire practice was me, nobody working there but me and my wife at the front desk to take appointments. And I'd spent about 6 years doing that. And the cost was just insurmountable. I was making money doing my work, and our little retail that we had at the front started to get disseminated by the advent of internet purchases, people going to Amazon to buy things. I had this full stock of wetsuits in the lobby with all the tri gear, whatever. People would come and have us show them how to fit the tri-suit or the wetsuit, and then go online and buy it. And so summarily, one product after another was eliminated from our stock. But what ended up happening is all the work I was doing in the back was paying for all the purveyors in the front. And after about 6 years of that, I mean, I made it work. My overhead was pretty crazy, and I made it work for about 6 years. And I finally said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And I went home, and I outfitted one stall of my garage, which is like one segregated car space, started working in there. And I was getting business that come to me from all over the world. It was bizarre.
In your garage.
In my garage. And so now it gets better. So the interesting thing about it is I started working with some athletes that became world champions. And I mean, aside from the fact that I was coaching them and guiding them with the information I was getting from the diagnostics I was doing and what have you, that became how I got business. It was word of mouth. And so-and-so would connect the dots. They say, he works with so-and-so. He's like the best in the world. So I want some of that, right? So they would come and see me. And so without me doing any advertising whatsoever and working out of my garage, my business became pretty interesting. And then it was then we get to the name of the business, right? So one guy gets a hold of me and he said, "Hey, look, I understand you're the guy that worked with, I'm not going to drop names. You're the guy that worked with so and so, and in that whatever that secret lab or whatever it is you got going on there, and so I want some of that." So he can, he became a client of mine. So then the term secret lab stuck. So now people refer to what was my one stall garage as the secret lab. No signs, really no way to direct people to it other than a website. And I did that for quite a long time, and I was doing clinics. Then I started doing clinics all over the country, and we would pack up and buy on demand. This with no advertising, nobody front running it for us to garner the business. I would get some random call. Hey, what's it take to get you to come out, right? And so I was working with groups of about 20 to 25 people. You appreciate that to do VO2 testing on people over the course of a weekend, there's only so much time that you have, right? So it was very limited to how many people I could actually see. So we tried to cost it out so it made sense for us to visit, and we limit the number of people we could see. And so my MO for about 10 years in 14 states in multiple visits turned into what was a gait analysis, gait correction, VO₂max test, and basically a summary of what the information meant and how to put the information together to benefit them. And I had been doing that, like I said, on demand. We did that for, I want to say, about 12 years. And no, so and what I haven't told you yet is that we were living in California for all that time. And then 4 years ago, we sold our home. We moved to Tennessee. So now I'm in Tennessee. And so now I have a 2-car garage.
Big upgrade.
Okay. So my business format doubled, right? And my deal with my wife was that when we move, I want to build a facility on our property that I can operate, without being in this little space, and have room, right? And it didn't work out as I hoped, but I did get the whole garage, right? So, and the first thing I did is I had somebody go in and, fashion the thing so it doesn't look like you walk in there and if you feel like you're in a lab. And so that's Secret Lab 2. And now it's been evolving and starting all over again. So by the way, so here I am in Nashville, Tennessee. I had a client here yesterday, flew in from British Columbia. Okay. So from British Columbia, get a hotel room, spend the night, next morning, show up, see me for the gait evaluation, VO2 test, a little bit of work, and back on the plane and back home. And that's been the way it works. So I have people that have come from Europe. I've had people come from Sydney, Australia. I had somebody this year come in from Paris, France, and I mean literally show up on Thursday night from the flight, see me Friday, leave Friday night. So that's what I've been up to.
I like it. That's fascinating to hear kind of how that journey's gone and how and where you've done the testing and all those things. That's awesome. So, traveling around and testing athletes all over the country, that's pretty fun. I'm sure you've gotten to see just about every type of athlete from every type of sport.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And to be very frank with you, I don't know a lot of people that do what I do. I know people that test, but I don't know people that do what I do. I don't know anybody that does what I do. So this adventure has been difficult because typically, if you're in the business of selling hamburgers, you know what the market is for hamburgers, right?
Right. Well, and there's mentorship and examples to follow and things. Yeah.
Exactly. So I've been just out there, raw, trying to figure it out, and I still haven't figured it out. But The blessing has been that through my efforts, I've developed quite an audience of people that are willing to come and see me. And I've also had good luck in that some of the athletes I coach did really well. And now, so right now I'm pretty involved in the HYROX space. And the current world record holder for HYROX is somebody I've worked with for the past 10 years. And so a lot of my business comes from the relationship that I have with him. People identify he's the guy that helped him set a world record that, by the way, it's been standing for about 4 years now. Nobody's been able to beat it. And then I also, when Spartan became a thing and everybody was running up and down mountains and doing obstacles, the obstacle racing world champion was one of my clients that I had trained for years. And then he became the North American champion. And, you know, that community identified me with the fact that world champion came from me. So my advertising budget is zero. I don't spend any money in advertising, and I get these random calls. So somebody, hey, so I want to come see you, right? And then I do, and so apparently something I'm doing is working. Otherwise, it probably would have fell apart about 15 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Clearly, you've seen success with it and have had some amazing athletes come through. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, a couple of questions. I guess I'll dive into the first. What, with working with athletes from all different sports, all these different fields, what got you into the HYROX world? What got you into the Spartan world? Was that just kind of a chance meeting, or was there something specifically about that, those type of athletes, those type of events that really spoke to you?
Well, so the only sports that I went into with intention was marathon running, which I was familiar with. I wrote a book on how to prepare for a marathon years ago. And then triathlon, which was near and dear to my heart back in the day. What a lot of people don't know is that I directed the first professional triathlon for CBS Sports in 1984. And I used to own the Maui Triathlon. Mm-hmm. So it just was a natural progression for me as I was getting out of doing the races myself to work with that type of athlete. But Spartan racing came to me by accident. Somebody approached me and turned out that he was a fledgling professional obstacle course racer, which they called it mud running back then. It's like, I didn't identify it as a sport. I just said, well, you run around in the mud and who are you? And again, so I had to Google him. I had to Google him to find out who he was and whether he was legit or not. And sure enough, he was. And so we started working in that space, and then they started coming to me. And so it was, people approached. I'm a mercenary. They came to me for it, so I followed it, right? And then the same type of thing happened with HYROX, and the HYROX got to be a thing. And so I'm getting a lot of people that are interested in HYROX. And then that's developed into something. It's probably 85% of my business right now. And wow. Yeah. And so, then I was approached by the people that developed the sport, and they've made some noise about having me come out to Europe or England in March for their summit to do a presentation for their fledgling certified coaches. And so, I don't know. It's just been interesting. I didn't do anything by design. But I think the question that you have underlyingly, I'm going to get ahead of myself and ahead of you, I think, is the curiosity of what I've learned about the differences between those athletes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And this is really something that I find fascinating. And I'm sure you probably experienced the same thing, where you hook up somebody to a metabolic cart, you have no idea what's going to come out of it. And then it starts to evolve. You start to see some interesting elements about who they are and the way they're moving and such. And so I've always been fascinated by that. After all the thousands of tests that I've done, every time I put a new person on that cart, I get excited because I don't go into with any predilection. I don't go think, well, I know he's going to have a big VO2 score and his threshold is going to be X or whatever. I never do that anymore because I just never know. I've identified that you just don't know till you know, right? And so the first thing that came to me that was interesting now, and you guys can correct me, please, if I'm wrong. When I early days got into the business of testing athletes, the 99 percentile of the business I was doing was endurance athletes. And the concern being, what is your threshold? How do we move that threshold up? Improve your capacity to access your fat stores so you can prolong the effort, maintain more, blah, 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 right? And so that's a pretty easy shtick, in my opinion. It really is. You identify VO₂max, you identify potentially where the metabolic shift is, what the percentage of fat versus sugar is, what we can approach the work with in order to improve those circumstances. Then I started doing the work with these obstacle course racing athletes, and I started to see a very big shift in the way the testing results came about. I started identifying that a lot of these guys were extremely aerobic. Relative to their VO2 scores, they were very aerobic by nature. And my first thought was, call somebody at KORR and explain to me why this machine's not working properly. I thought there was something wrong with the kit, right? And, come to find out that wasn't the case. Everything was calibrating very nicely. It was fine, right? But the nature of the way they approached exercise was unique because they're shifting to exercises that require strength for a limited amount of time, straight into endurance-based work, right? And so we started identifying that, the guy might have, for example, recreational athlete, let's just say the norm for a adult male, about 50 VO2 score. And they're just give you hypothetical numbers. Let's say we're looking at a maximum heart rate, 180 beats per minute, and a threshold being somewhere like 165, which, in a general consensus, recreational athletes, not professional athlete, that's a pretty high value, right? And I started seeing that over and over and over again. And so I started to think in terms of what is it they're doing in the exercises that would yield that type of an experience or that kind of an outcome. And so I came to a place where I finally figured that it is the way they're training that's causing this outcome, right? So I'm going to take it a step further. I had mentioned that I worked with the world champions in the sport of Spartan racing. Well, I'm really trying hard to avoid this guy's name, and I apologize for that. But so try to imagine this guy. Here's an athlete. He's 210 pounds. He's 6'2". He's running at about 6-7% body fat. And he came to me and said, "Hey, here's my dilemma. I have to race 14 miles up and down a mountain with obstacles, and my greatest competitor is 140 pounds of legs and able to run well." He goes, I got to get my run game up, right? And so I said, that's quite a problem. Just the energy costs alone to move that big of a man up and down a mountain is going to be insurmountable, right? But we went to work, and lo and behold, he ended up being the world champion. And then, so I've tested him multiple times over the course of that relationship. Not just VO2 testing, but also doing resting metabolic assessments, looking at recommendations on what his feeding strategies might look like, and working on all the other various things that we work on as I'm coaching him. And then he comes to me one day and says, "Hey, look, I'm going to try to get a wild card in the CrossFit Games." I said, "Really?" This is a complete polar shift from the type of training he's going to do to get. And so he goes to work on it. Lo and behold, he gets a wild card, goes to the CrossFit Games, doesn't do that well. But in lieu of that work, all that high intensity, heavy lifting and things like this put a pretty profound change in his metabolic structures, right? Then comes HYROX. HYROX is a hybrid, high intensity event, start to finish, but coming off all that strength work and then manufacturing more and more power output. His VO2 score was in the toilet. His threshold dropped by about 35 beats per minute.
Wow.
And he set a world record. Okay.
In HYROX.
In HYROX. And
Wow.
so he looked at me, and he was, obviously he's concerned. He's looked because he knows what his VO2 score was before. So we went from, I'll give you some numbers. He went from about a 69 VO2 score to a 55. Okay. And so he looked at me and he was, well, I don't understand what's going on. I said, whatever you're doing, don't stop doing it. I said, because it's working. So this gave me food for thought. I started looking at the shift in the facilitation of muscle fibers. So the recruitment patterns that are going off relative to the type of training he's doing is shunting the potential to move that oxygen effectively through the muscles to get that endurance. But it doesn't matter because the intent is to get it done inside of an hour. And if the only concern was the amount of energy that you needed to do the work, that's not a problem. But, the acidic nature, the lactate production, all blah, 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 that's really the enemy. What do you do about the toxicity in the course of that intensity? So I've been chasing this down, and I've been doing VO2 testing, not just running, but also on a ski erg and also on a rowing machine to look at the comparatives between those efforts, and then putting these guys through essentially, let's call it a combine, where we're doing compromise work. Well, I'll have them go out and run, by the way, here, 95 degrees, run 95 degrees in a suit, a plastic suit, and then do a VO2 test on them with the suit on after they ran a mile and a half in the heat, just to see under that stress what their VO2 score looked like, what their threshold looked like, and just trying to get a sense of how the thing works. But that's been my day job. Looking at the differences between the outcomes relative to the exposure to a specific training modality, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, we were talking about this, we talk about this all the time, but this idea of, does your training match your goals? And so I think it's so interesting what you say here is it's like, if I'm training for endurance-based activities, things are going to look one way. And what's good in terms of scores, in terms of metabolics for one event isn't necessarily transferable to the other event. There is crossover, obviously. But I think that's just one of the fascinating things that you're finding is it's like, oh, there's different demands for this sport. We need to train differently. And so your values don't have to look exactly the same. Your training's not going to look exactly the same. Your goals aren't exactly the same. And so we need to adapt with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Matching the training to the event and the training goals. Often you find on social media and other things, people saying like, here's the right way to exercise. And it really just depends on what are you training for. And that's one of the things that I love about VO2 testing is we can line those two things up finally. By doing proper testing, we can make sure that we're lining up their fitness effort and their fitness goal so that we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I found interesting, and I've ranted about this a lot, because I refer to myself as a fly on the wall. I'm 72 years old. I've been at this for a very, very long time. And so someone might look at me and say, well, what do you know about running, or what do you and so I don't want to try to go down that rabbit hole with them because it's not important to me. But I'm watching these people in the sport where they're kind of lost. There's no blueprint for how to effectively approach this sport because it's so novel. And so what they're doing, and I use this analogy, you'll like it. It's so somebody invites you to a wedding and you don't have a suit. You need a suit. So you go to TJ Maxx or some little store to buy a suit because you just need one. And you buy something off the rack, and it kind of fits, but it doesn't quite fit. But you buy it, right? Opposed to having something tailored for you. And so because people don't know what to do, they just use what they've heard of that worked before for other people. So marathon runners, triathletes, cyclists, there's a pretty steadfast model of how you might approach that training. And it's known to be effective in improving outcomes. So they have nothing else to lean on, so they grab that and they carry it over. So now what I'm seeing is a lot of guys dedicating a tremendous amount of time to zone 2 training, hoping that one day they're going to move their threshold up in a sport that demands an exclusive anaerobic activity. And so I've never met anyone that can win that race being anywhere near aerobic. And so to give you an example, the world champion, who again I'm very familiar with, he races at about 180 beats per minute from start to finish. He's 175 to 180 beats per minute. And as I told you, a week after having set a world record, I found his threshold to be about 130. Well, let me be more clear. Respiratory exchange ratio of 1 was 135 beats per minute.
But he sustains that for an hour. So the event is typically around an hour
The
long.
world record is 53 minutes and 40 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. So for that duration, it's just training your body to be able to handle being anaerobic, right? For shuttle lactate and all of those things for that amount of time.
Absolutely.
Which is extremely uncomfortable for most of us to be there, because like you were saying, the lactate buildup, the amount of carbon dioxide in your system, the acidity of your blood, all of those things make that very challenging if you don't develop those systems.
Exactly right. So and then you figure that the concept of time, you have only so much time in order to produce this work. This is not a sport where you can dedicate 24/7 to the activity. So you got people that have jobs, they have families. So on common, you're looking at, if you could dedicate an hour and a half daily, that's all you got. So if you look at collectively over the course of a week, you have 7 hours to train, just hypothetically. And you're dedicating 60% of that time to building your aerobic base. You just wasted 60% of your time, in my opinion, because you're not going to get the type of return on that investment that's necessary to improve your anaerobic capacity. Because it's not your aerobic potential that you're looking for. You're looking to build the capacity to tolerate that acidic nature of that high intensity. And I wrote a book about this, by the way. And it's like funny because it's so contrary to what the common man's looking at, that because they don't have the purview. They don't have the look at things that you and I have, because we're testing people, right? We're not just coming up with an opinion of what Bob used to do, and because Bob was successful at what he was doing, do what Bob does, right? That's, that I refer to that as the study of one. You do as I do, be as I am. And that dog won't hunt without some methodology and some process to figure out collectively what is the way to do this, right? So, I have fun with this. I'm going to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
people ask me, when are you going to retire? I said, well, when I'm dead, I suppose. I mean, as long as people want to come see me, I'm willing to see them, right? So who knows? In another year, there might be a new fledgling sport that comes about, and it's a whole new challenge, and we start looking at that. So
yeah. No, it is fascinating to see how each sport has its own, nuances that make it a completely different model that is what's ideal. And then even with that, you talk about how triathlon training and running training, distance running training is fairly textbook at this point. We've had enough. You talk about the sample size. We have a large enough N that we kind of know some of the best ways to train and things. At the same time, still super valuable to do a VO2 test and make sure that we can apply that method directly to that individual, because everybody's body makeup is different. But then taking like a novel sport like HYROX and applying both the uniqueness of the athlete you have in front of you, plus these newer principles that you're developing, like that's got to be really fun.
It is, and it takes the boredom out of it, right? If I was still working with triathletes, I'd already shot myself, right? It's just, I've seen enough of that, but I tell you the interesting component of this to me is not just about the testing. The testing is validation for me, because what I'm really built on is developing efficiency. So obviously enough, we want to do everything we can to lower the cost of work without sacrificing performance, right? So when I was working with triathletes, I learned, because I used to do dual assessments. So a client would come to me and I would put them on their bike on a trainer and test them. And then look at what their threshold was, look at what their VO2 score was. And within 15 minutes, at less than 15 minutes, have them on a treadmill doing a VO2 on the treadmill. And I found collectively that the VO2 scores running were typically about 30 points higher than they were on the bike. And the VO2 score was similar, within a couple of, points, the VO2 score was the VO2 score. And so what I used to tell people, because I didn't know any better, was, dude, you need a cycling coach. You don't ride the bike very well at all, because if I got a cyclist that came into the sport, it would be the reverse. Their cycling VO2 score and their threshold would be much higher than running because of the inefficiency of the running, because they don't run, right? But I learned that there was another element to it, which was being on the bike correctly. I was introduced to bike fitting. I found the very best bike fitter in the country, as far as I'm concerned. And I got him to spend 3 days with me. We mind melted. He taught me how to fit somebody to a bike. And so I wouldn't even do a VO2 on somebody on the bike unless I had an opportunity to fit them to the bike first. I said, show me the way you're on the bike, and if you look good, okay, fine, we'll move on. But there's no sense in trying to get a sense of what your metabolic efficiency on the bike is if the bike is the constant corruption that you're facing when you try to ride. So we got to fix that. And so now this is a closed chain exercise, right? You got 5 points of contact, your hands, your feet, and your butt. You get all that in the right alignment, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's good. But running is an open chain exercise, right? So you take flight, you come back to earth, and it's either a collision or a good landing. You're either producing good efficiency or inefficiencies. So I started to realize how important that was. And so I really delved into learning how to do a proper gait evaluation and gait correction. And so that's been a real big part of my process. So my MO is this. Like, I'll give you an example of what I did yesterday. Girl comes in, don't know her. She's a triathlete. First triathlete I worked with in a long time, by the way. And she's in University of British Columbia. And so she does sprint triathlons. And she's young. And so she came to me for the running mechanics, basically. I convinced her that she should do if she's going to come this far, she'd do a VO2 as well. And so that's usually the way I package the visit anyway. I want to do a VO2. I want to do a gait evaluation, gait correction. And because that, by the way, principally running is such a large component of most of these sports. If you don't run well, you got a serious problem, right? So I look at that as the first thing I want to concern myself with. So what I'll do is we'll do a gait evaluation, make some corrections, show them how to run properly, show them that they're capable of running correctly, and then I'll do a VO2. I don't bother them about the way they run during the VO2 because the efficiency or the amount of work they're able to do on the VO2 is going to be greater if I just let them run the way they're used to running, right? But after that, I'll take them out and I do this thing, I call it trust but verify. Okay, trust but verify is I just got the data from a VO2. I got a sense of what their metabolic turn point was, where their energy is coming from and such. And then I'll take them out and I'll run them in the street. And I will be with them on a chase bike and I'm monitoring their heart rate. I'm dictating pace. I'm making sure that they're keeping their running mechanics on point. And then I will quiz them along the way for perceptive effort. On a 1 to 10 score, how are you right now? I'm a 5, pick it up. I'm an 8, pick it up. I get them to 9 or 10. They let me know they're at 9 or 10. I'm looking at the heart rate response. And then what I'll do is I say, okay, let's back out. And then I want to see what the recovery looks like. Not complete recovery, but the ability to get back in to effort effectively. So what is my concern is what is truly sustainable relative to the distance and challenge that you're facing. That, my friends, is a different number than your threshold for many people. So what I'll do is between having the data and then doing the trust but verify. Then we'll come back, and then I get on my dry erase board and we start plotting. We start looking at, okay, here's probably what you should be doing relative to what I'm learning from you. And that's the visit. I usually spend it. It's about yesterday turned out to about 4 hours that we're together, and then back on the plane and go home.
That's fascinating.
It's a whirlwind adventure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, taking what you've seen from all these athletes, and you mentioned this before, you've written several different books. So, Training the Dark Side was Running and Hybrid Fitness, I think was another one. Tell me a little bit more about how what you've seen with different clients across the years have gone into the books you've written. And then what was the impetus behind each of those books? Was this like, hey, I'm seeing this again and again and again and again? Like, instead of explaining this to everyone, I'm just going to write a book, or like, what was the motivation for each of these books?
That's a really good question. So the first, and by the way, I self-publish, and the first book I wrote, I thought, I don't really care whether I can get this published or not. I just want to put this in writing. And so the first book I wrote was called My Best Race. And what was interesting about it is I felt like this is probably been about, 9-10 years ago. And what I was identifying with all the testing I was doing, working with marathoners and runners and triathletes, is that few people really understood heart rate. To me, it was like a smoke detector. Everybody, it was a novel concept to buy a heart rate monitor and you'd wear it until eventually it was just confusing. And then next thing you know, it's in you don't wear the strap anymore. It's in your drawer. Now it's just a watch, right? Because it doesn't mean anything to you. And I felt that this was a big problem. And so I wanted to write a book where I can help to educate people on what a valid approach to implementing heart rate into their training would look like. And I developed this iconology, okay? So I created these icons to represent these various components of work. So, and by the way, they turned into refrigerator magnets now, and I use them on my dry erase board when I'm building, I call it the war room, right? So I have an icon that represents cadence. And because cadence is a critical component of running mechanics, it's bigger. I made a big one, right? And so it's got like a little metronome on it and whatever. And then I have another one that represents motor skill development training, which I feel like just kind of finding your capacity to produce work without flaw. And that's not heart rate developed. And then there's an aerobic icon, and then there's an anaerobic icon, and then there's a VO₂max icon, and then there's an icon that represents anaerobic effort going up a hill, and there's an icon that represents VO₂max effort going up a hill. So if we're doing like intervals or whatever. And so these icons are in the book. And when I created a training template, it's icon based. It's like reading music. Okay. And then, so I would indicate relative to what your predictive measures might look like, shifting 10 points here or whatever, this is what the intensity should look like. And here's where it needs to drop into your training. And in this book, I wrote a template for 5K, 10K, half marathon, and a marathon. And I did it for various levels of ability. And I explained the implementation of heart rate, whatever. So again, that thing is, interestingly enough, I still have people that buy that book on Amazon and will, share with me the success they had from the book, right? And then Training the Dark Side was quite a bit longer. And I'm learning how to do this now, just formatting and developing the book a little bit better. And Training the Dark Side came from, I felt that there was a shift in the way these athletes were performing and the demands that they were facing relative to just running or just being a triathlete. And so Training the Dark Side suggests the dark side being anaerobic. Okay. So what do you do in this environment that you're going to have to live in? And so that was kind of the stepping stone for thinking in terms of what do you do when you're in this fire? And I used to tell people, nobody wins a race aerobically, right? There's going to come a point where you're going to have to go anaerobic and you better know how to deal with it, right? So that was what that book was about. And then Running and Hybrid Fitness was kind of a lead off of that. It just kind of an evolution. And because that was really getting hard into HYROX now. And in there, I created 56 days of training for HYROX. And the icons still are there, representing what the intensity should look like, when it should be there, what the recovery should look like, relative to the challenges along the way, with a big piece on running mechanics in front of it. The last book I wrote, which I wrote, I don't know, this year, just released it this year, is called Flow. And Flow is it's hard for people to look at that book and identify with what I'm trying to say, right? And so now I'm looking at perception, and now I'm looking at the influence the CNS has over capacity. Okay, because your central, I'm singing to the choir. I realize this, okay, guys, but I'm looking at in the very first chapter I talk about a story that everybody's heard, right? The woman who picked the car up off of her baby, whatever, this kind of thing. And everybody I say this to shakes their head. Yeah, I know that story. No matter where in the world no matter where in the world I am when I ask the question. So I chased it down. I wanted to find out who this woman was and whether it was real. And matter of fact, there's a woman named Angela, I can't remember her last name, lives in Georgia. Okay. And it's a real story, but it wasn't a baby. What it was her son was working underneath the car and the jack kicked out. So hearing him scream or whatever, she went out there, lifted the car off of him, and held the car off of him for 5 minutes until the neighbor came over and pulled him out from underneath the car. So it begs the question, how in the hell does some average human being, female, pick up 3,000 pounds for 5 minutes? And so I started looking into the research behind how that comes about, which they refer to as hysteria strength. You know, your brain just goes off and says, this has to happen. This is a critical component of life. We have to make this happen. Then I started looking at some research that was done by Tim Noakes, and I'm sure you're familiar with Tim Noakes, and started looking at the central governor theory and started thinking about how do you make friends with your central nervous system when it's telling you it's time to stop doing this? And so the concept of flow is, rather than looking at something as an end product, standardized number of distance or intensity or whatever, just looking at, rather than, and this is going to kill you, rather than looking at thresholds, I look at levels of resistance. So someone might say VT1, VT2. So, but there's a point where things are starting to get untenable. And so let's call that first point of resistance. So rather than just evade that resistance, start thinking in terms of what it is you need to correct. Is my breathing patterns off? Am I carrying too much tension? Is there some anxiety associated with what I'm doing? Is my mechanics off? The flaw in the way I'm moving is causing insurmountable cost. And so I want people to think in terms of not so much judging, but interpreting the resistance and trying to negotiate with your central governor and the central nervous system to allow an opportunity to go further and further and further into the intensity. And so that's what flow talks about. And I preface it by, again, what I refer to as trust but verify. I want the data. I want to know what's going on and whether we're starting to encourage the ability to go into greater and greater intensities without being shut down. And incidentally, this is critical when you're talking about lactate production and things like this. What do you do to deal with that ensuing acidic nature or all the other components that are starting to shut you down?
Well, so it's interesting, right? Because what you mentioned is getting the data, which is important, right? We want to see how they're doing. But then what is other low-hanging fruit, right? Are there lifestyle factors? Is there sleep, their anxiety, right? Other stressors? How have these other things that are going on, how does that affect their perceptual effort? And I'm sure it's you can have someone with all the right numbers, but when the psychology side isn't dialed in, then they may not perform as well as they could.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they fail. It's manifest destiny. So they get it in their head that things aren't going well, then things won't go well, right? And they have all the tools in the toolbox necessary to produce the work, but something is triggering failure. And so I start looking at that. I mean, you can only go so far with so many different elements of training. But I just felt like the thing that wasn't really built on well enough is trying to get a sense of what is it that's really keeping you from achieving your goals. And it might not be, like you just said, you might have all the physical properties to do the work, but the psychological properties are working against you. It could, there's just so, and I'm not a sports psychologist, not trying to be, but it's fascinating to me to look at it from a different perspective rather than, and I also started searching all the great athletes in the world, that these massive achievements and the little snippets that you get back from these guys, like this moment in time where everything just dropped into place. They want to call that as being in the zone, right? To me, this zone is essentially flow, where you get in this place where you're just having this congruence with your body and starting to develop capacities well beyond what you ever thought you could do. And the testing is just a way to bear out that things are going well. Things are starting to get better, right? So it's a lot of stuff. I don't mean to bore you with all this, but
No, not boring at all. It's fascinating and so fun to be able to test that. So I kind of have a question where I want to go back in time a little bit. You mentioned that you had worked with some other metabolic carts and things like that. What brought you onto the cardio coach, and tell us kind of how you found the cardio coach and things like that.
So my cardio coach is old school. I probably have, I don't know, I want to venture to say I probably have one of the longest reigning cardio coaches on the market. And, Julia's trying to convince
working
me.
Great.
Yeah. Well, I'm going there. Okay.
Yeah.
It's been a beater. You have to appreciate that I travel with this thing, right? And it scares the crap out of me every time I do it because you never know what's going to happen in luggage, right? And now I've got a case. As a matter of fact, years ago, KORR offered me a case to carry my equipment with. I convinced them that it was a great idea because I was invited to do testing on a cruise ship. When it was crazy. So Spartan, the company, decided to put 2,000 Spartan racers on a cruise ship to go to an island in the Bahamas to do a race. And they invited me to come along to do testing on all the top athletes in the sport on the cruise ship, right? And I said, these guys are getting ready to franchise this thing out. And, the good chance is we introduce them to this, you might be selling a lot of metabolic carts, right? So they gave me a nice, I have it to this day. I use it all the time. And so I travel all over the world with this thing and, getting it out and setting it up wherever you might be. A lot of times I'm doing it in a hotel, in a little fitness room. It's always a challenge of where I'm going to get set up to do my testing. But I never have had a failure of the equipment, never. And it's been a lot of years. Okay, we're talking a lot of years. Now, if I take a step back, the card I got from Med Graphics, I've had occasion where I would go to a facility to do. I used to do testing in Los Angeles at this place. We did a lot of work with professional triathletes and whatever. And I'd go in there to go to work and hit the button to turn it on, and I get a black screen. Dead to the world. Dead to the world, right? And so you call somebody in support and say, oh my God, what am I going to do? Well, send it to us and, we'll get it back to you. And the repair charges were through the roof. And I was just dead. I mean, my business was dead until that cart came back to me.
Right.
And I've worked with a couple other carts too, not owning them, but working with them, just had exposure to it. Saul was working with some other folks, and I ended up testing with one of his devices. When we're doing the LA Kings, we had to have 3 carts running at the same time because there's just too many guys to test, and 50 people in an 8-hour shift, right? We got to get it done.
Yeah.
We brought some Excalibur bikes in, and we scheduled the Excaliburs so that we shut guys down in 7 minutes. you know, because they didn't really care too much. They just wanted a VO2 test because that's what they do every season, right?
Right. They just want to see, did this guy keep his fitness up over the off season?
Absolutely. The only concern they have is, are we going to find this guy or not? They didn't care what the data said, by the way, you know, because I'd look at him and say, you're not playing this guy. Why are you not playing this guy? This guy's got great metabolic structure. You know, his power output, whatever. And they go, yeah, no, you know, they didn't want me to analyze anything. They just wanted to hand them the report. And then they wanted to be able to say, you know, I remember, you remember Luc Robitaille?
I don't follow hockey very closely. I wish I would.
Okay. Luc Robitaille was one of the premier professional hockey players in the world. And his VO2 score was 49, right? And they called, 2 days after I tested him, I get a call from one of the coaches, and they say, we got a problem. I said, well, what's the problem? They said, Luke's not happy with the score.
You should have worked harder.
I said, ask Luke if he wants me to come and blow in the pipe for him. But incidentally, the average score over 3 seasons, testing 50 professional hockey players, was a VO2 score of 50. I think I probably saw 2 360s out of 150 tests.
Huh.
Well, try to appreciate the nature of the sport is 14 seconds on the ice, high intensity, rest.
Yeah.
14 seconds on, you're out, in and out, in and out. They're bringing these guys in and out of the game about every 14 seconds, and they're going hard. So the nature of their sport is absolutely anaerobic.
Yeah.
So we weren't seeing big VO2 scores. We weren't seeing, there was nothing remarkable about the testing. And then we did a Wingate test. So we're looking at their fatigue index, and we're looking at their median power output and whatever. And I've had some guys throw up some massive power.
Oh, I'll bet.
Yeah. But they cared more about that because they do this thing called blue line testing, and they want to know, can the guy throw out some serious power for about 10 seconds?
What's the average weight of a hockey player? Are they 200 plus on average, or are they like 180 to 220 type of a range?
Well, they're getting, you know what, over the years they're getting bigger, but they tend to be, like you say, they run about 185 to 210, depending on the position. Yeah. You know, sometimes a little bigger than that.
Yeah, just wondering because of how that factors in. You know, I had a soccer player who, when he quit soccer, he gained about 20 pounds, mostly of muscle, but his VO2 max went down quite a bit. And it's like, well, that tracks with VO2 max being
relative
milliliters
mass
of oxygen, per kilogram of body weight. If you add 20 pounds to the equation, your VO2 max is going to go down just from that if you're not doing additional to improve your fitness. So, yeah, that tracks.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean he wasn't still fit. His relative VO2 max went down because he has more mass.
You know, I got contracted to do VO2 testing for ESPN Sports Science. You familiar with that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they would call me up and they say, look, we need you to test this guy. And so I was in California, so I would drive into Burbank to the studio and set my card up, and I don't even know who it's going to be yet, you know. So I tested a girl by the name of Tatiana McFadden, and she was born with spinal bifida, and she's a world champion marathoner on her little trike, and she was holding an average about 100. What was it? She was holding 24 miles an hour.
Wow.
With her arms, and her heart rate was about 128 beats per minute.
Wow.
I mean, 24 miles an hour on a bike is going at a pretty good clip. Yeah.
Yeah, but she won the Berlin, Chicago, New York, all the major marathons 5 years in a row.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I tested her for ESPN Sports. So I guess where I'm going with this is I had a chance to test a lot of crazy. And you were talking about soccer. That's what made me think of it. I tested a professional soccer player for them too, where we did this whole thing where we had this ball launcher, you know, where you like tennis players have this machine that throws the balls out. Yeah. This thing throws soccer balls at you. And the deal was he'd catch it off his chest, kick it into the net, catch chest, net, chest, net, chest, net. Do that a bunch.
Yeah.
And then do a bunch of agility drills around some poles. Then they hand them to me and then do a VO2 test on them. What was his name? His name escapes. It was many years ago. One of the top. He'd been to the World Cup 4 times. What was his name? Anyway, I forget. But I tested about a race car driver. Who?
That's cool.
So I'd get all these crazy people, and then they say, "Well, what can we say about this guy?" Right? What's unique about this guy after you tested him? And, the producers would call me up and they'd say, well, can we say this? I said, no, you can't say that. That doesn't work. That doesn't track at all. But yeah, anyway.
No, that's fun. I love that series, the sports science series. That's fun. I tried to look it up to see who that was, but it's not pulling up quick. Anyway, that's so fun. It's always interesting to just see how each athlete, when you test athletes from different sports, how they stack up in different ways and where those averages are. And sometimes, like with the hockey, that's surprising to me. But yeah, as you learn the nuances of hockey, that makes more sense why their metabolic status, I guess, is what it is. That to me is one of the most fascinating things. I always call a VO2 test kind of like a crystal ball of where I can see your past, present, and future all within your VO2 test. I can see how you've been training. I can see where you're at right now, and then what we need to do based on that to get your numbers to where we'd want it to be for whatever your sport is. Do you agree with that, I guess?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and it's almost like it sounded like me saying this, right? Because the unique nature of, and I'm sure that's pretty much how you guys roll too. I'll get these people, I don't know them. I don't know anything about them. And of course, I don't want to jump right into testing with people. We sit down, we chat a little bit, get to know each other a little bit, right? And they're always wanting to share with me their history. Well, I've done this and I've done that and I failed at this, I succeeded at that. And I put up with it, to be honest with you. I don't really give it a whole lot of merit because I know in a minute or two I'm going to find out who they are, right? And then, and based on what they've told me, I put the two pieces together and then I could almost very summarily indicate, well, this is why you're having the problem that you're facing, or this is why you're doing as well as you're doing. Yeah. And this is what you should do next.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fun. You get these interesting cases. I once had a guy that one of his biggest complaints about his running. So he's an ultra marathoner, a guy that, is running 100-mile races. And when we test him, he burns almost no fat. Like he burns mostly carbohydrate the whole time. And I'm like, how are you completing these races? So he's a former lineman in football. So a big guy, he's running ultra marathons at about 2:15, and he's 6'5". So he's a very big guy running these super long races. And I'm going, how are you doing this? Burning almost no fat. It's like, are you eating like 600 or 700 calories an hour? Because as we were looking at it, it's like, that's kind of the rate he was burning at the pace and heart rates that he was doing. It's like, are you eating like 600 or 700 calories an hour? He's like, no, I'm at like 500, and it's so hard to eat that much every hour. But yeah, that's the biggest problem is I'm always just running out of gas is what it feels like. And it's like, well, that makes a lot of sense based on like the way you're burning right now. You'd have to eat so much food to, sustain that for that long. It was pretty amazing to see just the fact that he's able to accomplish that with what his metabolic profile looked like.
Yeah, I run into that too. I coach some ultra marathoners. I have a client right now that I've been working with for the last couple of years, and his goal was to win World's Toughest Mudder. And if you're familiar with World's Toughest Mudder, it's a 24-hour event on a 5-mile loop with 32 obstacles on the course that you have to do over and over and over again. Yeah. And so, basically, whoever covers the furthest distance in the course of the 24 hours wins. Yeah. And so we're seeing in the neighborhood of 115 miles over the course of 24 hours.
Wow.
And by the way, just to give it some context, if you're not familiar with it, there's one obstacle where you have to climb up these cargo containers, the kind of containers they put on boats.
Mm-hmm.
They have like 5 of them stacked up on top of it. You got to climb up on top of it and jump into a river and cross the river and climb out of the water. And you have to do that every 5 miles. And so that means that for a good bit of the course, you're running in a wetsuit
Mm-hmm.
because it gets cold at night. And so you're facing hypothermia.
Yeah.
Part of you wants to take it off because it's so uncomfortable. Part of you knows you can't do it because if you do, you're going to freeze to death. And so we're talking about a very compromised effort.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this guy I've been working with, I tested him like he was on his way to go do the event. And I tested him and I found that he was pretty efficient up to about 170 beats per minute. And I had a hard time having that come out of my mouth when I was talking to him because dare I tell this guy that he should race at 170 beats per minute for 24 hours,
Right.
And
right.
he did it. And he did it. I mean, I'm collecting the data. I get training peaks and I'm looking at everything,
Mm-hmm.
So now I should say that he didn't finish the event. He pulled out after 70 miles, but he pulled out because he was cold. He said, energetically, I was fine. He goes, I did not feel like I needed more food or anything. Everything was fine. He goes, my hips were a little sore but I was cold and I just, But he never intended to win. And he was by the way, he was in second place at that point in time.
Oh
he could have won. I was watching it on television and then I finally just, I'm done. I'll see it in the morning. I went to bed, woke up in the morning, he DNF'd. I'm like, what the heck?
Oh.
But he's run, there's a thing called the Crazy Mountain 100.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's in Montana. And it goes from like 6,000 feet elevation to 11,000 feet, like a roller coaster on a single track trail for 100 miles.
Yeah.
And he runs for 28 hours straight in the neighborhood of 170 beats per minute.
Wow.
And he's able to do it. Now,
yeah.
I mean, forget about whether the percentage of fat versus sugar is an issue. That's just a lot of calories that are going away every hour, wherever they're coming from, right? And they're not exclusively coming from fat.
Right.
They're coming
probably
50%. And his rate of burn was probably on an hour was around 1,200 calories.
Yeah. Yeah. I tested the 50K national championship and national champion one year. And it was really fascinating to see. So he crossed over kind of that 50-50 fat and carb burn, the 0.85 RER. He crossed over that threshold at 175 beats per minute. So a guy that's training, he was training like 105 to 115 miles a week. He came into my office one time and was like, hey, can I use your treadmill to just run some laps? He ran 15 miles at a 6:30 pace and then another 15 miles, like took a short break, then ran another 15 miles at a 6-minute pace. And he did it like it was no big deal. Like it was just really impressive to see. But then when I tested him, at 175 beats per minute, he's still burning, half of his calories are coming from fat. So pretty impressive when they have that big of an engine.
Yeah. No, it's fun. You're talking about all these various athletes and that to me is like an opportunity to dig into them a little bit and find out what they got, right? They could do all these stories about what they're able to do and didn't do or whatever, and you get to test it. See what makes it work, and it's fascinating. It's good work. I mean, we could do this all day. I mean, honestly,
trade stories and analyze cases and stuff. Yeah, it's so fun.
For me, it's actually you guys are the first 2 people I've talked to, and I can't tell you how long that actually do testing on athletes. Right? I don't roll with guys that are doing this work. I'm just doing it myself. I'd like to have like 4 guys that can look at the stuff together, and have a consortium. We get together and say, well, what do you,
We've talked about that, doing that as an episode, sitting down with a few of us and like roundtable discussion.
What do you take from it? What do you think, right?
Yeah. What are your insights? Because we've got another guy who's big into the lung values and the respiratory values and what all of that means and how you can get improvements in people's performance out of improving their breath work and their respiratory values. And so that's something that I haven't been able to capitalize on quite as much in the training that I've done with people. And so it'd be really fascinating to see his perspective on that and how we could help some of those athletes improve in those ways in a way that I haven't really dove into as much.
You just made me think of this. What is this device called? These O2 sensors that you can put on your quadricep.
Oh, the Moxie. Yeah, he does a lot with the Moxie sensors as well. Mm-hmm.
They approached me,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's been a long time ago. They approached me about these sensors. And
Well, so they are compatible with the cardio coach, actually.
really?
The Moxie sensors. So you can gather that data on the cardio coach and then be able to see that in tables and charts and stuff.
So you could do a VO2 test and have the Moxie on and get both pieces
at the same time.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, really fun. And so again, that's something I haven't had the chance to dive into quite as much as I would like to, but it is cool when you see those tests and you see the muscle oxygenation. There's just lots of different ways and different expertise in this, in testing, and like we've explored all kinds of different athletes as well that may need different things to help them really take that next step. And so really fun.
Yeah, I just thought it's fascinating that the oxygen uptake that you're looking at there is regional, right? So you're going after a specific region on the body and seeing whether that's developing the capacity to perform, so to speak.
That's fun.
I mean, so cool to be able to be a part of that. And I mean, just as we've talked, like it's just to see your career and where it's gone and just the different types of people that you've been able to work with and just all of the changes. And so anyway, it's been a fun chat. Like we said, we could keep talking forever.
I could talk with you about this stuff for a long time.
Anyway, as we get ready to end this, any last parting words of wisdom, like things that you wish people knew about training, about performance, that you feel like would be helpful?
Well, I think a key thing that people should know is a lot of people are under the impression that this testing is reserved for elite athletes. And that's a complete misnomer, because I believe that if anyone is going to present themselves to fitness, if they're going to achieve or attempt to achieve fitness, they should at least identify with what they need to work with and then have a better sense of what they should or should not be doing to improve their fitness. So I encourage people, all walks of life, all ages, to have this assessment. Let's find out who you are and what needs to be done. And I think that's the biggest mistake. I think that's probably what's been the biggest hurdle for me in my business over the years, is people just don't see it. They just think, well, I'm not that guy. I'm not good enough for that. I'm not, I don't have the kind of talent that needs to be, addressed in a clinical setting like that. Yeah. So testing is important. And, I don't want to drag on and need to shut this down, but my first consideration when I identified the importance of testing, my first revelation was, wow, when I get this cart and I'm doing this kind of work, how long is it going to take before all the clubs and all the people around me start testing too?
Yeah.
I was in fear of the competition, right?
Yeah.
And here I am 30 years later and feeling like I'm running uncontested. I mean, I don't have enough competition out there to make my life difficult.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's wild to me. We always say that we always say that doing cardiovascular exercise without knowing your heart rate and heart rate zones and things is kind of akin to lifting weights without knowing how much weight is on the bar. It's not that you can't get a decent workout. You just have no idea if you did or not. And you don't know if you're progressing or not. It's hard to really know if you're making good progress. And so same idea, if you can get really good data and know how your heart and your body is responding to exercise, you can make better progress and you can make real improvements. And that really can only happen well with a VO2 test.
I agree. I agree. And listen, I appreciate you guys having me on.
Oh,
It was
it's
fun
been our
talking to you.
pleasure.
You know, we need to do the next one we're doing a bar. We have a couple of drinks and, just, we'd be there all night.
Yeah, it'd be
No,
a fun time.
So much to talk about. And, I loved your last point of how we can make this accessible to anyone. I was actually talking to someone just the other day, like, well, people that are just kind of getting into exercise, should I even have them do the VO2 test? Should I just do the RMR? And I said, of course, like, let's get a baseline. Let's find out where they're at and then where they're headed.
Let's make their journey into fitness a lot easier because they're acting the way their body needs right now instead of, throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping it sticks.
No doubt about it. I was just going to say that, parting statement should be that kudos to KORR. They've got a great product. I stand behind it. And I've got to know, I've been involved with KORR for so many years now. I got to know people. I've got to know Julie pretty well. And, I love talking to her. And I don't feel uncomfortable reaching out to the manufacturer of my toy, because there's warm bodies and hearts at the other end that care to help you, and that's not always the case, my friends. So,
well, that's good to hear, and that warms our heart. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, if people want to find you, I know you're on Instagram, you've got your website, you've got your books. How can they find out more about you, follow your journey, follow what you're doing?
Well, I am on YouTube, and it's under my. I'm a terrible businessman, I swear to God. It's like under my name, Richard Diaz. People can find me. Don't go Diaz Human Performance on YouTube. You're going to find 40 people follow me there because I never put anything there. And, I got 20,000 followers on YouTube under my name. But my website is a good place to find me because then I can interact with people. And that's diazhumanperformance.com, which is the namesake of my business, diazhumanperformance.com.
Awesome.
Well, thanks again so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. We've had some good discussion and good laughs, and so this is great. So again, thanks for joining us. For more of this content, as always, remember to like, follow, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next episode. This podcast is a production of KORR Medical Technologies. Ready to take your metabolic testing to the next level? Visit KORR.com to learn more about purchasing our metabolic test equipment.